Good afternoon, everyone. Well, today I want to share with you my thoughts regarding the matter of Christians' hope. Now, when I speak in this context, I'm not referring to hope in God for salvation. I'm thinking more of the hope that we place in God on a day-to-day basis, on an event-by-event basis in our daily living. I've been reasoning through this in my mind a lot since September 2018 when I had my head injury, and as some of you may know, some of the ongoing medical complications have been quite far-reaching. So it's been very much in my mind the matter of trust and hope and how that relates to our faith in God. There is a thing I have come to call the hope dilemma. It's just my way of wording it. And when I talk about the hope dilemma, I'm speaking of that which we Christians sometimes create for ourselves, and it works like this. I say that I trust God. I say that I hope in God. Now, often what we mean, or what I mean when I say I hope in God, is that I trust Him with some specific prayer requests. That's typically the context in which I would say I trust God, or I put my hope in God. If I'm not talking about eternal life, I'm not talking about salvation, and I was to make a comment about hope, it would typically be in relation to prayer requests that I've made to God, specific requests, and looking to Him to give me a response for those requests. And so I guess that I would do much like most people. We have a situation arise in life. We feel the need of whatever has happened in our lives, and so we go to God in prayer, seeking His assistance, His understanding, His resolution, and some answers. And there's a conflict that arises in my thinking if God does not respond the way I expect Him to respond. If I don't see that my requests have been responded to by God in the manner that I assumed He would. And so I end up thinking somewhere in the back of my mind, even though I don't necessarily like admitting it, and even though it makes me feel very uncomfortable, somewhere in the back of my mind, that little human fleshly voice says, God didn't answer your prayers. You're wasting your time putting your hope in God because He's obviously not interested. And these random thoughts can go through our thinking when we're under pressure, when life has got us backed into a corner, when things have gone pear-shaped and we are very disheartened. And so there becomes a conflict in our thinking, in our hope in God and our expectation of how God should respond to our hope or trust being placed in Him. I've thought a lot over the years about the life of Job. Now, as most of us know, if you read the book of Job, his life was torn to shreds. In the matter of a very short time, most likely only a day or two, he lost everything except his wife. He lost his children, his employees, his possessions. He lost his health. He ended up sitting on the local rubbish tip, covered in weeping sores, and dogs used to come and lick him. And he was abandoned. And so he understood what it means to lose everything. And I'm intrigued in Job 6 verse 8. Job prayed, as you'd expect. He was a God-fearing man. And listen to what he says, and most of us could resonate with what he says. He says, "Oh, that I might have my request, and that God would fulfill my hope." So we see there, he has a need, obviously. He has hope in God, so he takes that request for God to fix his situation. It might be his health issues. It might be his financial devastation. It might be the enormous grief that he was carrying because he'd just had all of his children murdered. And what didn't help was in his ear, his wife used to come and visit him and say, "Job, curse God and die." Well, she didn't offer any really helpful things. That sort of statement is not helpful to a God-fearing man. And so he turns to God, makes his requests, he puts his hope in God. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But is that as far as hope goes? Is that the best that we can expect of hope in God? Is that we hope, we anticipate, we trust, we just hope that he answers our prayers and fixes our dilemmas? Because if that's as far as it goes, we end up with this dilemma in our thinking when he doesn't give us the answer we expected, and we feel isolated or abandoned, as Job did. Well, as we read on through Job's account there, we see a development in his understanding of his hope in God. So what I just read to you is from Job chapter 6, verse 8. But if we go down through his account to Job chapter 13, and in the first part of verse 15, listen carefully to what he says. He says to God, "Though he slay me, I will hope in him." Now that's a big transition from what he was saying a little bit earlier. He's saying now as he's been evaluating his life, he's had these three rather wonky friends come and try to offer their so-called wisdom to help him, which just frustrated them and increased his anxiety because they had a completely wrong understanding of God and how God interacts with the pains of life. And so he says now in chapter 13, "But God, even though you were to slay me, I want you to know, God, that I would still hope in you." Now the transition is this. Job has gone from associating his request to God with his hope in God to simply having a hope in God that's irrespective of or separate from his expectations of what God may or may not do. Because that is probably the most extreme thing God could do, is take his life. And so he was saying, "God, even if you don't give me anything I'm asking for, even if you were to snuff out my life, God, I want you to know to my dying breath, my hope is in you." So what's the character of this hope? That hope that Job experienced that went beyond a prayer request with an expectation of a specific answer. What did Job know about hope that we don't often think about? And that's the aspect of hope that I've been exploring in the Word of God and in my own mind, trying to bring clarity so that the circumstances of my life that have gone haywire since this accident would be proven to be of benefit to God, to God's glory, and of benefit to other believers. Like you, I guess when things go wrong in life, as a Christian, I wouldn't like to think that I would respond wrongly to those unfortunate or bad events and dishonour God. I think that would be probably the mind or heart attitude of most Christians. But in the process of prolonged suffering, and when the suffering gets intense, and suffering starts to cost you those things that you held precious in your life, and you start to waver in your thinking, and you start to waver in your beliefs, and the devil will often send some supposedly well-meaning friend along to whisper in your ear, "Oh, it's just not worth it. This God thing is not working out. You got yourself in this mess. Obviously, you're going to have to get yourself out of it or find some way of working through it because God's obviously not answering you." And there's always a trail of people like that to whisper those sorts of doubtful ideas and thoughts into your head. So here's my point. And I'm going to try and word this clearly, and if you don't quite get the point, replay it or even write it down. Or email me and I'll explain it more clearly. But here's my point. We should not hope in God simply to give us the outcome we want. Yeah, I'm going to read that again. We should not hope in God simply to give us the outcome we want. No, we should hope in God himself with no expectation of any specific action on his part. I'll read that again. It's a big thought if we're not accustomed to thinking about this. We should hope in God himself with no expectation of any specific action on his part. And that's because our primary interest is in God himself. As believers who have put faith in Jesus Christ, we are, and we should be, more interested in the nature and the character of God than being simply interested in what he can do for me. The second is extremely superficial. The first should be our primary. God has stepped into our lives. He's made himself known to us through his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. He's given us eternal life, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. He's washed us clean as a consequence of us putting faith in Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross of Calvary. So once we remove our expectation of receiving something specific, we are then freed from the possibility of our hearts being motivated to manipulate God, or possibly to attempt to negotiate a deal with God that says, well, God, if you're doing such and such, I'll respond by doing this or that. I think there'd be very few of us, if we're to be honest, that has not done that or said that to God at some point in our lives. We may have said that before we became Christians. That may have been a conversation we've even had with God after we've become a Christian and we really want something. It might be something we really think we need, and so we start to bargain with God. Well, that's pretty shaky ground for hope. And I'm suggesting that true, primary, ultimate hope in God has no connection to a request or an expectation for a specific answer. See, getting past the expectation stage in our development of hope can actually be more difficult than we may think, or that we may even care to admit. However, when we do get past that expectation stage and we start to really consider and evaluate, what do I mean when I say I hope in God? When we do get past that, and typically leaves us with only two directions we can move in. The first, we'll take the negative one first. We could choose to be discontented. And discontentment motivates us to move away from God. Life's gone pear-shaped. I have noticed that a number of people in our community are suffering from depression and from being housebound due to the lockdown from the coronavirus. And we're approaching almost the end of week number 4. And during times like this, I think many people, including myself, we start to think about things. We start to think about life and our values and what is precious to us and what is not so precious. And we start to think about God as Christians, probably more than usual. And that's a good thing. But if we have expectations of God that are not being met, that breeds discontentment. And typically that will move us away from God. And there are many ways in which discontentment moves us away from God. It might be that we simply start to distance ourselves from God by stopping to pray. We cease to pray. We cease to read his word. We cease to listen to worshipful music. We cease from communicating with Christians who would normally encourage us, etc. It may be that we develop through our discontentment an indifferent attitude to God that sort of says, well, I know God's there, I know he's real, I know I said that sinner's prayer in the past, but really it's just not working out, and I don't know, I'm just going to put him on the mantelpiece for a while and let's see how this pans out, but I'm not very happy with the way he's responded. Discontentment can express itself in many negative ways in our lives. You might start saying to yourself things like this: I would never have imagined a God that would let this happen to me. Or, I can't imagine a God who would do something like this to anybody else. The problem is, we are looking to our emotional hearts and to our imagination to instruct us as to what the nature of God should be like, instead of going to God himself. And the only way we do that is through prayer and through time in God's word, because in God's word he reveals himself to us very clearly. And so if we have those thoughts where we just can't imagine God doing certain things, we end up rationalizing our reasoning processes to formulate a God that we can imagine ourselves being happy with. Now we're getting into really dangerous ground. We're discontented with God, so we start to reason and change the way we think and process our thoughts about God, until we end up with formulating our own ideal or our own picture in our minds of what God is like, and that God that we picture makes us happy and contented, and so we say, that's what my God's like. It turns out this God is very invariably not the God of the Bible, but the God of our imaginations. I tell you people, discontentment with God only ever leads to some kind of idolatry. You might want to think about that, and we can come back and talk about that another time. The other option is, if you've got to a point in life where you are really searching for a deeper, more meaningful hope in God, we can choose to be contented with God. And contentment which simply is happy to know and be in relationship with God. This sort of relationship, one where we look at God and we say, I am content with who you say you are, God. I have no desire to change you. I have no desire to change the way I perceive you. I choose to be happy with you. I choose to be content with you. Now this opens up a future of infinite possibilities, because God's doing the leading in our thinking. And when he leads in our thinking as guided through his word, the Bible, we follow. We don't sit there and argue. We don't sit there and challenge and say, I don't like the way you said. I don't like that. I don't agree with that. No, God authored the Bible. His word is authoritative and it is final. And so we say, God, what you say, I believe. And so we choose to be content with who God says he is in the Bible. That's a contentment, I suggest, that lives in the satisfaction of the moment. It's a contentment that is secure in the knowledge of God moment by moment, event by event. His will is sufficient, is the bottom line. We're content knowing that God is sovereign and he is working in my life regardless of the situation, regardless of the circumstances, and note this, regardless of how I feel. And that's where Job had got to. We said, God, even if you take my life, my hope is in you. And that's the hope I think the apostles had. In fact, I'm certain of it. And that's a hope that I am seeking God to develop and grow and mature in my own life. And so I invite you to walk this walk with me, to see from the Word of God over the coming weeks how to mature our contented hope in God, irrespective of circumstances and feelings. Listen to Psalm 46 verse 10. The psalmist writes, "Be still and know that I am God." Now, you've probably heard that verse a lot of times, but it's very pointed, don't you think? Be still. Pause. And simply, in the stillness of the moment, God says, know that I am God. You're not God. Your circumstances are not God. The coronavirus, the pandemic going around the globe is not God. So be still and simply be content to know that in the midst of all this, I am still God. I haven't been dethroned. I haven't been challenged. Jesus Christ has not been overthrown from his supreme position of ultimate lordship. Later on in Psalm 62, David stretches this out a little bit more. And in verse 5 to 8, I'll read it to you. David writes, "For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him." I'm going to read that again because the way he structures a sentence is not the way we would structure it. He said, "For God alone, O my soul." So he's talking to himself. He's doing a very good thing. He's speaking to his soul. He's telling his inner consciousness, you could say his inner soul, his inner spirit, his inner heart, his inner mind, the most inward, intimate part of our humanity that makes us us. David is saying, that's the part of me I'm speaking to. Wait in silence, for my hope is from him, from God. Now, he has opened up a whole arena of theological truth there, which I'm only going to touch upon very briefly. He's told himself to be silent, because I'm going to give you, he says to himself, I'm going to give you some information that you need to understand. And this is a very good practice for us Christians to do, particularly when life is difficult. Do some soul talk. Tell ourselves some doses of truth. Build ourselves up with the absolute authoritative, certain word of God, because that truth we can stand upon. That truth will never change or fade or diminish or corrode and become of less value. And so he's saying to self, be silent, for my hope is from him. Believer, I would suggest to you today that hope there is a gift given to the believer. Certainly David, as he penned this, acknowledged that he did not have the ability or the inner resources to hope in God, but God gave him hope so that he could reinvest that hope back in God. And that's precisely what the Holy Spirit does within us. In Ephesians 1, we're told that we are given belief so that we can believe in Jesus Christ. In Ephesians 2, we're told that we are given faith so that we can put faith in Jesus Christ. So he carries on, he says, he that is God only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my salvation and my glory, my mighty rock, my refuge is God. So, before we read verse 8, David is telling himself, hang on to this. God is the one we rest in. He is the one we lean hard into. He is the one that when times are good and when times are bad, when times are difficult, at all times, we lean in dependence upon God. And he says there, it's on God rests my salvation. He was affirming to himself that his salvation was not dependent upon his works or his ability to please God. But his salvation rested wholly on God, because salvation was all of God. It was all from God. We can't purchase it. We can't borrow to get more of it. We can't work to earn it. It is a gift from God. And so he says, on God rests my salvation and my glory. My mighty rock, my refuge is God. Now you'll notice there in all of that statement, he does not say that God is those things because he has received a gift or received a fulfilled expectation. He's simply saying, these are the facts about God's soul. Listen up, take note, put that into storage in your memory banks, my soul. This is the God that we live for. And verse 8, still talking to himself. Trust in him at all times. Trust in God at all times. O people, pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. And so David is expressing there a very personal, deep and inner contentment of choice in God, who is his hope and is his salvation. In other words, David is telling himself to be content in the security of God. Not simply the security that is offered to David, even though that's valid, but that he knows God and God is secure. Therefore, David says to his soul, I am secure. If we were to flip that over to a bit of New Testament theology, I would encourage you to read Philippians chapter 2, but just take note of verse 13. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Now, there is just fantastic security and rock solid truth to stand upon there, particularly in times of difficulty. It is God who's at work in our lives, and he oversees everything. He is active in all the events of our lives, even the dark times, even the dark times when we feel isolated. God is present and he's active and he's engaged, irrespective of what we may feel. And here the Apostle Paul says, God is engaged in your life to will and to work for his good pleasure. Now, that means, in spite of all our time of prayerlessness, God is still active. In spite of those times of our selfish prayers, God is still active for the purpose of fulfilling his will and his pleasure. I am so glad for that, because I know when things don't go well for me, I typically ask for the wrong things. I start praying very selfish prayers, and that's a terrible downfall which I ask the Lord to grow me out of. But here we are. He says there, irrespective of everything, it is God who's at work in you to fulfill and to do and to bring into action his will, his volition for my life, and his pleasure for my life, and his pleasure from my life. And that's how he gets glory. Just to flick back and as a closing thought from Psalm 37, verse 3 to 5. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Oh, I like that. Make faithfulness to God, beloved, your friend. Make and choose to be content that faithfulness to God, irrespective of circumstances, irrespective of feelings, that you have chosen to be content with being faithful to your God, to your Saviour, and to your Lord. Befriend faithfulness. That's a wonderful way of wording it. And in verse 4 he says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Now he's not saying there, if you delight yourself in the Lord, that God's going to give you everything your heart desires, that God's going to somehow be the big divine Santa Claus and just give you everything you ask for and everything you want. Every desire you've ever had, he'll fulfill it. No, he's not saying that at all. What he's saying is that as you delight yourself in the Lord, it is the Lord who will place the desires within your heart. And so you will end up desiring what God desires. And for us, in New Testament times, that means as we are filled with the Spirit, as we walk moment by moment with the Spirit, being controlled and guided and led by the Spirit of God, he places his hope, his trust, his faith, and his desires within our heart. And you will notice in your life, as I have, that you start to dislike the old things that you once brought you pleasure, and you increasingly like the things that bring God pleasure. Verse 5 of Psalm 37, commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. Oh, I really like that. He's not saying trust in God and he will fulfill all your expectations. No, he's saying trust in God and God will act. Beloved, God is a God of action. He doesn't sit back on some big heavenly throne and go, I'll get around to that person eventually. Let's just see how it plays out. No, God's not like that at all. Whether we see it or hear it or perceive it or not, God is actively engaged in the events of our lives. The challenge for us is to open our eyes to recognize and perceive what God is doing. But rest assured, when we trust God, he acts. That gives us such certainty and such hope and such security and affirmation of faith that God is presently active in my life and in your life. Grab hold of that. Examine that. And choose to be content with that. Well, for today, I hope and I pray that my brief thoughts from Scripture on hope will stimulate some more deeper thoughts from you. As a footnote, I've been reading just recently a book which has only recently been released by John Piper, and it's entitled Coronavirus and Christ. That is, Coronavirus and Christ by John Piper. I got it as a free app that came with my Olive Tree Bible app, so you can get it free. If you were to go to olivetree.com and install their app, you can get a free copy of this book as well. It's a very good book, by the way. John Piper explores trusting God from a similar sort of vantage point which I'm exploring with you today, and I look forward to exploring it more with you in the future. I pray God gives you wisdom and humility as you examine your own hearts and talk to your own soul in regard to hope in God. Thank you.